Good afternoon, and welcome to our participants and presenters to the second webinar in the Curacao 2030 Sustainable Development Goals Action Week series, where the focus will be on Sdg 4, which stands for Quality Education. Today's topic, Education in a Regional Perspective, Curacao and the Caribbean. My name is Marva Brown, and I am the Secretary General for the Curacao National Commission for UNESCO, and I will be the moderator for today's session. It is the intention today that we continue with the second session of the webinar after the successful launch yesterday. I will now introduce our panelists for this afternoon, who are Dr. Faryal Khan. She is the Program Specialist for Education at the UNESCO Cluster Office for the Caribbean in Kingston, which serves 20 small island developing states in the English and Dutch-speaking Caribbean. She served at the UNESCO education sector from 1995 to 2011 in Paris, and UNESCO Doha Cluster Office for the Gulf States and Yemen from 2011 to 2018. Dr. Khan has experience in advising on educational reforms, policy, and planning in over 30 countries worldwide. Prior to joining UNESCO, Dr. Khan worked for the World Bank, Washington, D.C., and Beacon House School System in Pakistan. She earned her doctorate in educational administration, planning, and social policy from Harvard University in 2005. She has 2 master's degrees in education from the University of the Punjab, Lahore, Pakistan, 1989, and Harvard's Graduate School of Education, 1995. We also have Dr. Laurette Bristol, who is currently serving as the Program Manager, Human Resource Development at the Caribbean Community, which is CARICOM Secretariat. Under her portfolio, she has the responsibility for coordinating the development of regional education policy in the basic education skills for lifelong learning and tertiary education sectors. Dr. Bristol has held a visiting scholar position at the Finnish Institute for Educational Research at the University of Jyväskylä in Finland from 2015 to 2017. She is the former co-chair of the American Educational Research Association, Caribbean and African Studies in Education from 2013 to 2015. She also has a lot of interest in research. For instance, broadly speaking, revolves around the area of in-service teacher development, and she uses post-colonial theory, narrative research, action research, and practice theory. She has explored educational concerns related to school transformation, mentoring, educational leadership, and professional development. And we also have our third speaker, our very own, Nicole Waver. She is a Senior Policy Officer at the Ministry of Education, Science, Culture, and Sports with 11 years of research experience. At the Ministry, she is entrusted as the SDG Coordinator and is the representative of Curacao at the Sdg 4 Education 2030 Regional Steering Committee for Latin America and the Caribbean. Furthermore, she coordinates the Data Analytics Center that aims to integrate the data collected by the Ministry in the fields of education, science, culture, and sports for the management of its policies and for the production of information indicators that meet the needs of other users. These are our 3 speakers, presenters for this afternoon, who will elaborate from their point of view with regards to the SDG 4, quality education, and focusing on the SDG 4 education in a regional perspective, Curacao and the Caribbean. Each panelist will have 20 minutes to present, and after the three participants, the panelists, have presented, there will be an opportunity for the viewers to ask questions. And we ask you to make use of the Q&A section at the bottom of your laptop, the screen of your computer, or whatever device that you are using. You can place your questions there, and after the presentation of the three presenters, we will then, if time permits, try to answer all of the questions that we receive. Okay, Dr. Khan. I would now like for Dr. Khan to hold her presentation. Dr. Khan, the floor is yours, please. Can you open your mic, please? We're not hearing you yet. Please open your mic.
Thank you very much, Secretary General Marva Brown. I would like to thank you all for this opportunity to be with all of you today on behalf of UNESCO Caribbean Office. I thank you all for this opportunity. Perhaps they will put the presentation on and I can begin.
Yes, the presentation is on. You can begin.
So the next slide. I really would like to thank you all for this opportunity. I would like to thank Secretary General Marva Brown and also Ms. Nicole Weaver, who's a member of the Sustainable Development Goal 4 Regional Steering Committee and represents Curacao at the regional level. So today's presentation, I'm going to just introduce first SDG 4 and the coordination mechanisms, focus on some global challenges and achievements, because I understood I should also look at the global level, and then focus on challenges of monitoring SDG 4 in the LAC region. I will then continue to talk about the current COVID-19 situation and how UNESCO has put together the Global Education Coalition, engaging partners around SDG 4, and then the extraordinary session of the Global Education Meeting, which is foreseen at a very high level in October 2020. So I'm not going to go into details, but education is essentially captured in Sustainable Development Goal 4, ensuring inclusive and equitable quality education and promoting lifelong learning opportunities for all, and is deemed central to the realization of the 2030 agenda. It is one of the goals which is linked with all other goals and is really at the heart of the transformation of SDG 2030 agenda. Next. Next, please. Around SDG 4, Goal 4, we reaffirm the humanistic approach to education development. Education is confirmed as a fundamental human right and enabler of other rights, lifelong learning, and a renewed focus on learning. In terms of the coordination mechanisms, I would like to highlight that the SDG Education 2030 Steering Committee at the global level is really the responsible agency for the global coordination of SDG 4. There are global education meetings which are held, and an extraordinary session of the global education meeting is going to be held this October, and I'm going to speak about that soon. They have high-level meetings, regional meetings, and have also ensured the voices of the collective consultation on civil society organizations and the NGOs. And the UNESCO Institute for Statistics and the Global Education Monitoring Report play a very instrumental role in coordinating technical work on indicator development and monitoring. I'm actually very happy the music has stopped because it was hard to talk while with the music on. So I'll continue now. At the regional level, coordination becomes very important in the Latin America and the Caribbean region. The regional coordination takes place in Chile by the UNESCO office in Chile, with co-convening agencies, regional organizations, representation of regional civil society organization networks, and other regional and international partners. We also have regional representatives of the steering committee, and it's my pleasure to see Curacao on board the regional steering committee, along with Caricom and Grenada. And the regional organizations are represented in the steering committee meeting along with other partner groups. Next, please. So there have been some important milestones in terms of SDG4 coordination in the Latin America and the Caribbean region. And without going into details, this is part of the introduction, so I'm not going to read everything, but just to say that in January 2017, there was the big regional meeting of ministers of education of Latin America and the Caribbean in Buenos Aires in Argentina, and they agreed on the Buenos Aires Declaration and reflected on the 4 priority areas for the region: quality of education, equity and inclusion, teachers and educational staff, and lifelong learning. And then there were meetings in Chile, technical follow-up meetings in Chile, followed by again in Cochabamba, Bolivia, in July 2018, there was a regional meeting of ministers of education, again, of Latin America and the Caribbean region. And here they approved the Cochabamba Agreement and the regional roadmap for the implementation of SDG 4 2030 for Latin America and the Caribbean region. More recently, this year in July, the Latin America and the Caribbean office in Santiago, Chile, organized a virtual meeting, and the focus of this particular meeting was the COVID-19 response, and one of its achievements is to really protect financing for education and also assure harmonization of efforts to align with national priorities in response to COVID-19. Next, please. So in the Latin America and the Caribbean, in terms of the regional coordination mechanisms, the Cochabamba meeting adopted the modality of the regional coordination mechanisms for Latin America and the Caribbean region. The mechanism is composed of a regional steering committee. The Latin America and the Caribbean country representatives are Argentina, Brazil, Colombia, Cuba, Curacao, Grenada, Nicaragua, Panama, Peru, Venezuela, and Uruguay. And then there are 2 co-convening agencies, UNICEF and UNFPA. And 4 intergovernmental organizations, CARICOM, then CECC, SICA, OAS, and OEI. And 2 civil society organizations, namely CLAID and Education International, are members of the Regional Steering Committee. There is an executive secretariat, which is led by the ORIALC UNESCO Santiago office, and it supports the Regional Steering Committee in the implementation of the roadmap. And there are 4 working groups to carry out specific activities to advance the implementation of the roadmap in each of the following areas: review, monitoring, and reporting, policies and strategies, advocacy and communication, financing, and governance. we have these extensive regional mechanisms, but what really is the most important, in my perspective, is the coordination mechanism and the national coordination at country level. This is a government-led and inclusive process. It enables the governments and the ministries of education to avoid duplication by building on existing structures and have a system-wide approach beyond the silo of the education sector, and also collaborate with health, culture, economics, and labor and other departments. And this ensures linkages with broader SDG coordination. And this week's meeting and event in Curacao really shows how the education needs to work closely with the other SDGs, and other ministries of education, the public and the private sector, and the broader partners. Next, please. In terms of reporting and monitoring, a technical cooperation group on indicators for SDG 4 Education 2030 is established. This is a platform to discuss and develop the indicators used for monitoring Education 2030 targets, and convened by UNESCO Institute of Statistics, which is based in Montreal, Canada. There is an interagency group on disaggregated education indicators, IAG, DEI, and there's also the Global Alliance for Learning, which really contributes to the reporting and monitoring. And then, of course, we have the Global Education Monitoring Report, the GEM report, which provides annual reporting on progress on the implementation of the goals. And the UNESCO Institute of Statistics has a site where you can monitor data. And if you go to the UNESCO Institute of Statistics website, you can really download a lot of material on monitoring by goal, by target, and by country. Thank you so much. Next, please. I will now focus on some of the global achievements, and I'm going to do this very quickly. But in terms of global achievements and challenges, the priority has been going beyond averages, looking at equity and inclusion. So inclusive education needs to encompass all learners. Yet over a third of countries mentioning policies on inclusion referred to a single group only, learners with disabilities or special education needs. Maybe several mics are on or some speakers are on, perhaps. So, secondly, education and social assistance policies need to be designed jointly in promoting equity, as in the case with school vouchers for indigenous students in Bolivia, or the abolition of tuition fees for the poorest in Vietnam. Ministries of education also must monitor disparity to elaborate inclusion policies, such as in South Africa, they are screening students to identify the nature and level of support they need. And in Canada, they maintain an individual database for Equitable Education Fund. Secondly, going beyond access, we need to focus on quality and learning. Countries including the Philippines and Spain are increasingly developing national assessment systems that provide robust diagnosis of trends over time and are not just a mechanism to manage transition from one level to the next. There is a selective participation in cross-national assessments, as in Bhutan and in Pakistan, which is very valuable and a complementary tool to develop capacity and benchmarks in a national system. Works is used to inform curriculum, textbooks, and teacher development, and drive policy evaluation, as in the Bahamas, China, and the Czech Republic and Panama. Next. We also are looking at beyond basics, looking at content fit for sustainable development. And here we focus on curricula, which is being updated to promote sustainable development, human rights, gender equality, a culture of peace and non-violence, global citizenship, and cultural diversity. And we have curriculum development needs to be participating to encourage national ownership from the central to the school level. And curricula, teacher preparation, and assessment needs to be aligned. For example, in Portugal, citizenship education is being now monitored to assess how schools respond to additional autonomy. And in the Republic of Korea, where curriculum changes are combined with teacher education. And we are looking at beyond schooling, looking at lifelong learning. And governments need to address the challenge that the more educated are more likely to receive further educational opportunities. Next, please. One of the key messages is that we need to have cross-sector cooperation across sectors, and we need to have partnerships that are not just limited to other ministries, but also include government tiers, non-governmental organizations, and the private sector. And education ministries need to actively remove administrative hurdles and stand in the way of multi-sector partnerships. And we are looking at beyond countries, we are looking at regional and global cooperation so that we have regional organizations need to have a clear education agenda and align it to SDG 4. And governments need to seek opportunities for peer learning, and we need to have peer networks for education that are public goods whose coordination and communication functions need to be properly funded. For example, the technical cooperation group that is developed for SDG for the monitoring framework, it requires more resources to strengthen country participation. Next. Despite all the achievements, I must say, we do have a learning crisis. 617 million children and adolescents are not getting the minimum in reading and maths, and almost 60% globally. And this means this can threaten the progress towards the UN Sustainable Development Goal 4 and also the larger agenda. Next, please. In the Latin America and the Caribbean, next, please. We are looking at the strategic principles regarding access from SDG 4 regarding access. We recommend continuing firmly towards universal coverage in pre-primary and reaching where we have not yet reached, strengthening our progress and not stepping back despite COVID, from guaranteeing universal access in primary education and strengthening educational trajectories to ensure early entry permanence, continuity and completion in secondary education in order to comply with the universal coverage at this level. We need to focus on political demand for education and also increase opportunities for professional technical training and education for young people and adults. Next. We also need to focus on skills and competencies, and we need to continue to strengthen the educational experiences at the preschool level in the areas of health and psychosocial well-being. We need to ensure the levels of proficiency in at least reading and math, with special attention to the disparities of gender and ethnic groups in primary and secondary education. We need to work on the literacy of young people and adults by reducing the digital and intergenerational gap. And here, COVID-19 has really fast-tracked us with reducing the digital gap in some areas, but in other areas, we are exacerbating the situation, and the digital gaps, in fact, grow. So we need to be very aware of this. And we need to develop skills for work and lifelong learning. Next, please. And lastly, we need to have an increased and focused systematic efforts to increase the initial training of teachers at all levels and ensure universal access in educational spaces for basic services such as technological devices for pedagogical purposes, ensuring their equitable distribution within countries. And there is a need to increase investments per student to improve equity in the distribution of finances and increasing efficiency in the spending of education. But there are also some challenges when it comes to the concept of assessment itself, and how to evaluate assessments, and but also why they are important. There is a distance, and in the Latin America and the Caribbean, we learn that there is a distance and lack of communication between technical bodies that administer assessments and decision makers. Instruments are usually quite complex in order to be used to measure a set of skills and abilities. We need to disseminate relevant findings for improvement of education systems, and we need to build local capacities to transform data into information, and that informs policy and practice. It's important to identify what are the expected learning outcomes, whether they are being reached, and to identify disadvantaged groups and to see where are the gaps in diagnosis, where are the strengths. We need to learn more about students' progress and the elements that explain the success, why they are lagging behind, and understand the reasons of their success and not just who is winning the race. Assessment is only a part of quality. Assessment is not a goal by itself. So there are some complexities, and we need to keep those in mind as we monitor SDG 4 progress. Next, please. The concept of there is an evolution and innovation of large scale assessments, and assessments are changing. We need to now include new learning domains in assessments such as global citizenship education, sustainable development, science, new information and communication technologies, ICTs, and digital literacy. We also need to expand the assessments coverage to more countries and students. We also see that student surveys are evolving, and we need to include more questions that measure non-cognitive elements. And we need to look at social and emotional domains and 21st century literacy skills, which are sometimes overlooked in assessments. Thank you. Next. So this was just to give you some of the achievements at the global level, and I'm going to wrap up very quickly now. But I just want to say that in the midst of the work that we've been doing on SDG 4 monitoring comes 2020, and we are all hit by COVID-19, and more than 1 billion students are affected by schools and university closures due to the COVID-19 outbreak. And what does this mean for SDG 4 coordination, and how has UNESCO responded? UNESCO responded by establishing the Global Education Coalition that enables us to engage with our partners to respond to the crises. Next, please. So, as school closures widen learning inequalities and hurt vulnerable children and youth globally, there is a social responsibility to ensure continuity, inclusion, and equity for all learners and all students across sectors. 52% of the world's student population has been affected by school closures. 850 million learners are out of school. And in the Caribbean cluster of countries covered by our office, 1.3 million learners have been affected, and over 90,000 teachers have been affected. And there are over 48, 49 countries that are affected by school closures. So this is a global challenge, and the Global Education Coalition, the Caribbean, well, It protects the right to education during the unprecedented disruption and helps us to mobilize actors and resources to develop effective and unified programs. This is an initiative that is led by our UNESCO Head of Education, Dr. Stefania Giannini, who is the Assistant Director General of Education. And she has been very active in bringing the Global Education Coalition to the different world regions, including Latin America and the Caribbean region. And she has helped us to mobilize our partners and resources to coordinate our action, to maximize impact and avoid overlaps to reach the disadvantaged populations. And the Global Education Coalition is helping us to match on the ground needs and help us look at local and global solutions. For example, we've just concluded a training with Blackboard Academy, where all 20 countries in the Caribbean cluster were invited to participate. We've just today and tomorrow, or yesterday, we've had some webinars which we've organized with Microsoft in the Caribbean region to provide support to educators, but also education leaders, teachers, and principals. And we are trying to match on the ground needs with local and global solutions to provide distance education, leveraging high tech, low tech, and no tech approaches. And we have many partners on board, but in the Caribbean region, we are focusing on partnership with Blackboard Academy, Microsoft, Learning Equality, Video Games Without Frontiers, and Harvard's Lab Exchange. Next, please. The Global Education Coalition, we had 2 consultations in the Caribbean region and in July to see how we could work in a more concerted effort in the Caribbean. And this has helped us to support the equitable continuation of learning during the school closures, but also ensure a full and fair return to education, and also helps us to strengthen the learning systems and to build resilience in the long term. Next, please. There are 3 main flagships under the Global Education Coalition, focusing on SDG 4 as, of course, the central goal, connectivity, teachers, and gender equality. And we can learn more about these by going on the UNESCO Global Education Coalition website. Next, please. So the coalition helps us to understand the needs on the ground, cooperate with the ministries of education and local communities, leverage the commitments and strengths of the coalition members, and then implement impactful solutions. As we are now with Blackboard Academy, we've just completed phase 1 of the training for teachers. We are now starting phase 2. And with Microsoft, after we complete these 3 webinars that we've launched yesterday and today, we are also now engaging with a ministerial dialogue. With Curacao, we will have the dialogue tomorrow with Microsoft to see how we can have a country-specific intervention between UNESCO, Microsoft, and the Ministry of Education of Curacao. Next, please. We need to act now to reduce the impact of COVID-19, especially because there is globally a $148 billion annual financing gap in low and lower income countries to achieve SDG 4 from now until 2030. And this is like the latest data from Global Education Monitoring Report. We need to have additional costs due to COVID-19 related school closures, as there is a risk that this financial gap is going to increase. However, by investing now in remedial and re-enrollment programs, we can reduce this additional cost by as much as 75%. And we can see more about how UNESCO and the Global Education Monitoring Report are making efforts by visiting the Education Coalition website, which is available over here. Next, please. And now this brings me to the last few slides of my presentation. UNESCO is holding an extraordinary session of the Global Education Meeting in 20th of October, which is going to be a technical segment and a high-level segment with ministers and heads of states on the 22nd of October. This will be led by the UNESCO Director General and the Assistant Director General of Education, Dr. Stefania Giannini. Next, please. The extraordinary session focuses on education in the context of COVID-19 response and recovery. This is going to build on and take forward the collective actions and lessons that we have learned from COVID since March 2020, specifically the Global Education Coalition that I was just speaking about, also the emergency Sdg 2030 steering committee meetings, and Curacao is a member of the regional steering committee, and I believe we'll talk, perhaps Nicole Weaver is going to speak more about this in her presentation. Also, the United Nations Secretary General prepared a policy brief focusing on education, which is available on our website that you can look at, and also the guidance that has been produced over the last few months and the white paper for Save Our Future, which has been developed with UNESCO and other partners. And the overarching concern at this global education meeting is to at least maintain, if not increase, education financing, domestic and international, to assure we leave no child behind. When it comes, no child and no learner behind. Some of the key milestones to build back better have been, of course, as I just mentioned, on the 4th of August, the United Nations Secretary General launched the policy brief on education. Then on the 10th of September, there was a presentation of the Futures, Save Our Futures, the white paper, which was launched at the Global Education Forum. And just last week, on the 25th of September, there was a side event on the Global Education Coalition at the United Nations General Assembly. And I was so happy that one of our teachers, which has just received training from us from the Bahamas, as part of the Global Education Coalition Blackboard Academy training for teachers, she actually shared her experience at the global event, which was held at the United Nations General Assembly. So the Caribbean, we are really trying to assure that the voices from the Caribbean reach all global forums, and we share the experience of the education progress from our region at all forums, including the United Nations General Assembly.
Farial,
And now the big
Dr.
event
Farial. My apologies.
This is my last slide.
Yes, okay.
This is my last slide.
We are running. We have the other two still, and then we are afraid we might not have the opportunity for the Q&A session. So please.
Yes. So this is it. The big event is coming up in October, and we'll keep you posted on outcomes of this. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Farial. I will go on right away with Dr. Bristol. Laurette, please.
That's not my own.
Are you seeing your slide, Laurette?
It's now on. Thank you very much. Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you very much to the Ministry of Education, Curacao, for inviting the CARICOM Secretariat. And on the behalf of the Secretary General, Ambassador Erwin Larocque, I'm pleased to participate in this forum and share some of the experiences and the practices that we are engaged in at the CARICOM Secretariat. I'm going to take off from where Farial ended to some extent, recognizing that we need to transform data into information that can be acted upon, as well as ensuring that there is increased communication between components in a system and across systems. And components in this instance here is not just about systems speaking to each other, but those persons within the system engaging with each other to strengthen each other. So my presentation is entitled Unlocking Caribbean Human Potential, the Education Agenda, and it will focus specifically on the issues related to implementation, stakeholder participation, and monitoring. I will do this through the articulation of the Curacao Human Resource Development 2030 strategy that is aligned with the UNESCO SDGs, in particular SDG 4 and SDG 8. I'm not going to go over that territory again because I think it was well covered by Fariel. This is because the Curacao Human Resource Development Program of work revolves around education, sports, and labor. And towards the end of the presentation, I will briefly indicate the ways in which the region has been working and continues to work to stay on track and in some instance move the progression forward with regards to SDG 2030. Next slide, please. So of course, Right, so the first part of it is implementation and indicating that the vision of the Curacao Human Resource Development Strategy is to enable all our people as they progress from their earliest years to senior adulthood to reach their fullest potential in terms of their personal and working lives, contributing to not just their families and their communities, but also the national and regional development agenda. Next slide, please. And of course, we see that the strategic priorities for the strategy revolves around 4 key areas, which is around ensuring and improving educational access, equity, quality, and relevance, but also recognizing the need for developing creativity and innovation in the region as we engage with the demands and the imperatives of the 4th Industrial Revolution, ensuring social, inclusive and social economic progress, building resilience at the level of the individual, family, community, and the nation as a whole, including building economic resilience. We know that we in the region are particularly challenged by the impact of the environment. We have the least impact in terms of negative practices, but we receive the harshest effects, particularly around hurricane season. And of course, promoting the overall well-being for the citizens in the region. Next slide, please. So the strategy is intended to address some of the inefficiencies and deficiencies and shortfalls that we have recognized historically in the education system by reforming and redesigning the 3 interconnected sectors within a single unified seamless education system. That is basic education, lifelong learning, skills for lifelong learning, and of course tertiary education. This work is being done across 3 key projects, at least for phase 1. The implementation of the strategies across 3 phases, 2018 to 2021, 2021 to 2025, and 2025 to 2030. In phase 1, we have these 3 key transformative initiatives, or KTIs as we call them lovingly, and these are big projects that we are working on implementing across the region for the period identified. It's around ensuring and strengthening the quality of our education systems at the basic education level, and of course connecting that seamlessly to the TVET sector, the skills for lifelong learning sector, or ensuring that our regional skill sectors promote the development of capacity learning, because we want to ensure a seamless movement between the traditional and non-traditional aspects of learning, and of course in so doing transform economic capacity within the region. Next slide, please. So how are we actually doing this? So what can you go right? How can you go back 1 slide? Thank you. Right, thank you. So how are we actually doing this? And the way in which we're doing it is that we have increased stakeholder participation, recognizing significantly that across the Caribbean community, we are at different levels of readiness when it comes to implementing the SDGs and implementing the Curacao Human Resource Development strategies among member states. But we also have a deep understanding and appreciation of the different strengths that each of the different member states bring to the table. And of course, we are aware of the systems through those similar, because many of us share a common historical experience of British colonialism. We do have different types and capacity for agility in terms of responsiveness. Next slide, please. So one of the mechanisms that we are using to increase stakeholder participation, of course, is the Regional Network of Planning Officers. And these are senior educational planning officers within the region. And of course, the mechanism is asset-driven, recognizing that the region has the assets, maybe not enough of the capacity concentrated across each member state, but recognizing that we do have assets. And therefore, it is important that we use the existing assets to build capacity in a peer mentoring driven practice. And of course, in doing that, increase collaboration and networking within systems and across systems, including across member states, where these capacities are now being shared and scaled up with every encounter of the Regional Network of Planning Officers. Next slide, please. And of course, we recognize the importance of monitoring. And therefore, when we talk about monitoring, we're talking about transforming data into information, and was raised in the first presentation. So, of course, the Regional Network of Planning Officers has been engaged with the CARICOM Secretariat and, of course, supported by the CARICOM, the Caribbean Development Bank. We are proud to have published the baseline report, and this baseline report is going to be formally launched actually next week in a virtual launch that we are currently convening. The baseline report is a guide for policy dialogue on the development of the regional targets for the CARICOM Human Resource Development Strategy, as well as critically the actions that are required for achieving them. It's intended to be used by member states as a guide for developing their own national targets. Even though we have established the regional targets, it will position member states in relation to where the region is and how far they still have to travel. And it also provides a snapshot of the region's readiness to report, including providing that snapshot for the member state to speak to the way in which they are now ready to report and articulate the key performance indicators that are for phase 1 of the regional action plan. Next slide, please. Of course, we've experienced some challenges, and the region has a significant challenge with data management and reporting. The work of the RMPO, the Regional Network of Planning Officers, has been making a significant and sustainable impact as a coordinating mechanism on that particular challenge, because it's scaling up the criticality of our ability to manage data and also report, where the reporting here is transforming that data into information for actionable responses. Of course, we recognize that there's limited and in high demand capacity to measure strategic imperatives across the 3 sectors. Particularly, we have some significant concerns with skills for lifelong learning and the tertiary education sector. And of course, we are still in some member states, not all member states, but in a few member states, we're still not experiencing adequate enough student attainment in literacy and numeracy. Next slide, please. Of course, the result of that baseline report, and which emerges out of a situational analysis, is that the region as a whole comprehensively recognizes the impact adequate data management will have on the successful implementation, monitoring, and evaluation of the strategy. It has caused us to emphasize our commitments to increased investment in data management and program budgeting, recognizing and acknowledging the need to establish procedures and policies to support successful data management and monitoring and reporting on indicators, and also recognizing the need to build regional consensus, which is what the baseline report has done for determining, assessing, and benchmarking literacy and numeracy attainment levels within member states, and of course making those investments to build capacity to report on all indicators in accordance with the UIS methodology. And it's important to know that this baseline report was actually tabled and at the 38th meeting of the Council for Human and Social Development meeting of education ministers, and the baseline report and the targets for phase 1 were approved at that meeting. Next slide, please. So what are some of our current actions as it relates to monitoring the work that we are doing. So right now we are working in collaboration with the Regional Network of Planning Officers on developing a monitoring and evaluation action plan for the Human Resource Development Strategy. And we are currently in the process of collecting data for 2018-2019 academic year. That data, along with the data for 2019-2020 academic year, is going to be used to guide how we manage and redesign the intentions for implementation for phase 2 of the strategy going forward. Next slide, please. And we cannot ignore the pandemic response. It's something that is in the faces of all of us. We are unable to not be aware of it. It has brought with it a significant amount of challenge and trauma. However, I am beginning to construct it as a force sector enabler in many instances. While it has exposed and deepened our concerns with access and equity, and it is now challenging to some extent educational quality and the continuity and resilience of the sector, it has done some incredible work in the region. For instance, it has emphasized the need for increased leveraging of functional cooperation across member states within the region, and we have seen increased functional cooperation as the region responds and has a comprehensive response to COVID-19, including not just in health, but in the economy and education sectors, just to name a few. And of course, we see that we're moving slowly back into reawakening the tourist industry. There has been a commitment by member states to deploy a whole of government approach, ensuring that we are moving away from the siloed response, but understanding that all the sectors are connected and that we have to craft together a comprehensive response which ensures efficiency in the use of limited resources and increases the opportunity for success. Recognizing the need for targeted interventions for teachers, students, and I always like to say parents, because parents now carry a different role, similar to what was there before COVID, but the intensity of that role has increased, and therefore support needs to be placed for parents as well. And of course, as a region, we have comprehensively increased our investment in technology-enabled educational delivery, including training and infrastructure, and reorganizing the school day, redesigning educational relationships, and the ways in which we interact to support learning. Incredibly, COVID has forced us to confront the imperatives of the fourth industrial revolution, ensuring that we increase digital literacies in some fundamental ways. Next slide, please. So we are now working on maximizing the enabling environment. Of course, there's now, for us within the Curacao Secretariat and working in collaboration with our member states, an increased focus on competency-based pedagogy, renewed efforts towards assuring educational quality through attention to standards for the teaching profession and quality management frameworks for education. I should point out that the regional standards for the teaching profession was approved at the 38th meeting of COSOD, and right now we are working with member states with regards to implementation, adaptation, and adoption in some instances. Of course, we recognize the enhanced investment in ICT infrastructure to support educational management and delivery, where some member states have actually taken on the responsibility, working in increased ways with the private sector to ensure that not only do students, but teachers as well have the hardware needed and the software needed to engage in some meaningful ways. And of course, this has resulted in some new visions and demands for educational leadership, and stakeholders are now responding and innovating while in a state of unpredictability. And of course, that brings with it its own impact on social and emotional learning, and therefore a need to recognize the importance of self-care and mental well-being as part of the elements of quality educational delivery. With that, I say thank you, and my apologies for, next slide please, my apologies for racing through, but it's because I appreciate the need for us to have some time for Q&A. So I'm available for questions if needed. Thank you very much, colleagues.
Thank you very much, Dr. Bristow. And I would like to remind you that you will have the opportunity to place your questions in the Q&A, and I understood also via WhatsApp there will be the possibility to place questions. There will be the possibility to place questions. And without further ado, let me introduce our next speaker, who is Nicole Madu Waver, who is our policy advisor at the Ministry of Education, Science, Culture, and Sport.
Yes, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for being here. My name is Nicole Waver. I am a Senior Policy Officer at the Ministry of Education, Science, Culture and Sports. And today I will be elaborating on how we are implementing our SDG for Education 2030 within the Ministry of Education here in Curacao. I wanted to let you know, explain how the ministry has been involved in the whole SDG for track from the beginning on, where we participated with the UNDP in the national development, the national development plan, and also providing the importance of the SDG 4 within this the priorities. Furthermore, we also participated in the roadmap for implementation of the Curacao SDG program, because in order to see how we can involve our SDG 4 more within the roadmap. Furthermore, internationally, we are participating more we also participated in the regional solidarity to reach SDG 4 E2030 in Latin America and the Caribbean at Cochabamba. And also, just as Farial explained, we are a member of the SDG 4 E2030 Regional Steering Committee for Latin America and the Caribbean. In this steering committee, we got the opportunity as Curacao, as the island, to be a voice of the Caribbean, next to Grenada and CARICOM, because it is important in such a global setting to also be the voice of the Caribbean. And in this committee, Curacao has the opportunity to be a voice for 2 years, for 2019 and 2020. Every 2 years, other islands of the Caribbean get the opportunity to also become the voice in this steering committee. Furthermore, on a local level, we are participated in the national organized this Action Week, and furthermore, we are also the coordinators of the People Pillar of the National Commission for 2030 and SDG and the SDGs. And in the People Pillar, we focus completely on the more on the aspects on the targets of indicators of that are more related to people, which are no poverty, SDG 4, which is quality education, and SDG 3, good health and well-being. But as I said before, I am going to elaborate more on what the Ministry of Education is doing with the SDGs, and so we are focusing more on the SDG 4. I wanted to elaborate a bit on the targets of the SDG 4. I'm not going to say much of it, but these are the targets that fall under the indicator of the SDG 4, and we at the policy department we use these targets mainly as our framework, the skeleton, in order for us to, when we are making new policy or when we are adapting and re-evaluating old policies, in order to make sure that it will stay within the framework of the SDGs. Currently, in Curacao, we just finished our Curacao education agenda for the upcoming years. This is for the year 2020, 2022, where the focus is that we are stronger together. In this agenda, the focus is in the integral shaping of the individual citizen, and it is the task as a task of several ministries and institutions within our communities. So it's actually a cooperation. This is a cooperation between GOs and NGOs and the whole community, seeing as the basic function of education on an individual level contributes to the personal development of the individual. But on the other hand, we also have to remember that we focus, we also prepare people, individual at a social cultural level, preparing them for social functioning within the society. And also at the socioeconomic level, we are preparing the individual for professional functioning. In other words, and furthermore, we also are laying a foundation for further learning and for lifelong learning in a world that is rapidly changing. So these are all aspects that are important for our students, our citizens, and on all levels. And that's why it's also important to involve all our possible stakeholders. And it is important to achieve a great cooperation between all these actors, being administrators, trade unions, supervisors, policymakers, teachers, students, parents, employers, representatives, and citizens. And especially in the current situation with the COVID-19, we saw how important it is that collaboration and cooperation is very important. Within the education agenda, we have 5 strategic goals, and these goals are improved quality education. We also want to make sure that education connects with opportunities on the labor market and the demands of the society. We're also focusing on shaping the citizen of Curacao to foster global citizenship, increase access to education, so from the early education on to higher education, and to improve structure and funding within the education. Quality, how are we going to focus, elaborate more and achieve a higher quality education? Well, by access and standards. We're also focusing on continuous innovation of our curriculum and training of staff and supervision. Furthermore, for infrastructure, we are working on digitalization and modernizing the infrastructures and equipment. About when it comes to funding, we're working on updated and adequate and efficient funding. And lastly, for strong institutions, we are strengthening our ministry and institutions in the educational field. So in general, the goal of the education agenda is to inspire a new thinking, form a new way of acting among all of us involved within the entire society. And how are we going to do that? By enhancing trust in education through actually inclusion. And for this, it is important to show respect for each other, to listening to each other, to connecting to each other, to looking for similarities and appreciating differences. Because only then we are open towards the input from one another and we can work together towards the best future. How do we want to enhance this trust in education? By showing that we are doing the work. And how are we going to do it? Well, just as I explained before, by enhancing quality and more effective alignment between education curriculum and the workforce. And here we can see a direct link with the Sdg 4.1, which is quality primary and secondary education for all, a high quality education for all. Sdg 4.4, which also involves decent work, and by taking also responsibility for solving contemporary local and global issues. And this is 4.7, where the focus is more on the Sdg 4.7, which focuses on sustainability and global citizenship. Furthermore, we have the expression of, we're focusing on expression of governmental commitment towards making and keeping education accessible as a facility for every citizen in Curacao, which is 4.5, that is gender equality and equal access for all, where we feel, and one example of this is how during the last period, with the COVID situation, that we are working on involving, making sure that all students, all children get access to education even from home. And lastly, we also, on a national level, we are focusing on the controlling the expenditure on education, because that by making sure that these 4 points are taken care of, we can show that we are doing our job, and that we are, and people are allowed to trust, have trust in education. Globally, we wanted to also to focus within the agenda. We are focusing on the future. We are focusing on looking, because we think that education is an instrument in which the necessary attitude, skills, and mentally changes can be realized in favor for continuous learning, which in other words leads to a maximum employable and resilient citizen. And for this, actually, language is very important, because through language we can reproduce values and norms of our society, and all from generation to generation. And also the language also might, especially English language, might help our citizens to have the basic background in order to develop a global citizenship. And lastly, just like my colleagues just presented, monitoring is very important. We can have all the ideas and all the implementations that we want, but we have to monitor what we're doing in order to re-evaluate and readapt, if necessary, our situation, our ideas. And for this, the Ministry of Education has set up a data analytics center, where the focus is on policy research and evaluation of the policy, the previous policies, future policies, but also any questions that there are from within the ministry or from the citizens, that they wanted to know whether some there are some aspects that they want to analyze. We are there to help. And also we are working with the development now. We are developing now a CLOA, which is a central national online administration system, which enables a digital and automated monitoring system within the education system. So these are the steps that we are taking towards providing more trust and more transparency within our education, and also linking them to the SDG 4. Thank you for your time, and yes, and back to Marva, our moderator.
Thank you, Nicole. With that, we have now come to the Q&A section of our presentations by the presenters. And we would now like to see, we ask that the presenters are ready. If we have any questions from the audience watching or listening to these very interesting and eloquent presentations this afternoon. I know it's a lot of information that you received today, and it is never enough. We never have enough time to answer questions and to also reply to them. But if it may be the case that not all questions can be answered direct, we will take note of them, make a note of them, and then we will try to reply to your answer. As you know, the UNESCO is the only UN agency that received a specific mandate from the United Nations to coordinate the SDG 4, quality education. And it also has to do with the other 17 SDGs, because within these 17 SDGs, UNESCO also had a saying in coming to a stand for these. So actually, education, it's intersectoral in all of the 17 SDGs that have been adopted by countries during the General Assembly in the United Nations in 2015. Lots of countries are encountering lots of challenges by implementing the SDGs, and we know for a fact that with the SDG 4, that if I'm not mistaken, you could correct me, Dr. Khan, that with regards to education, many of the indicators and what the countries would like to achieve, that we are sort of not quite up to par. So it's not quite sure if all of these indicators will be reached by 2030. But seeing how we also had are having the pandemic right now of the COVID-19, which has brought a very, very change in everyone's agenda, everyone's schedule with regards to education. So so far we have not received any questions, but maybe one of the panelists would like to elaborate on a specific question. I would then like to ask Nicole, how exactly does the ministry think of implementing and reaching the Sustainable Development Goals for 2030? Just a moment, Nicole, because we think that your mic is... Yeah, so in the meanwhile, can you hear us now, Nicole? Should I repeat the question for you? We're not hearing. Well, let us go to Farial. Maybe Farial, from the perspective of
Can you hear me now?
UNESCO,
Yes, thank you.
You can answer that question.
Yes,
and
thank you,
when we
Marva,
have
for the very important
Nicole
question,
again,
interesting,
then we
important
will-
question. The ministry
we will then-
is
let us
focusing
go to
on
Nicole,
how
we are
to
not hearing
implement
you.
this
Let us go to Dr.
within the
Farial.
situation of the COVID.
Nicole, can you hear me? We're not hearing you. Let us go to Dr. Farial, and then we'll come back to you. Nicole? So, Dr. No, Nicole, let's do this. We will ask that Dr. Farial replies to the question, and then we will come back to you. Okay, Dr. Farial, please. Oh, it seems like we're having a bit of a technical problem. We're also not hearing Dr. Farial, but I know that the technicians, that they are working on this. In the meanwhile, I think now, Nicole? No, we're still not hearing Dr. Farial.
Sigue, Papia.
No, we're not hearing Dr. Farial. Laurette, would you like to try?
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. So you please go ahead from Caricom's perspective, and you are in the center. Attention definitely has to be on you. From Caricom's perspective, could you please give us an indication to the question that I just posed?
Can you repeat the question, please, Marva?
Okay, what I had asked Nicole actually was that how, seeing with all these latest developments, how does the ministry in Curacao think that it would be the best way for them to implement and have a good result with regards to the SDG for quality education? So then in this case, you just turn it now for the CARICOM. How would the CARICOM see that perspective? And then for Dr. Khan, it would be then out of the point of view from UNESCO. So then we will go now to Laurette. Dr. Bristol, please.
Right. So, from the CARICOM perspective, as it relates to the implementation of the SDGs, recognizing that the Caribbean community would have its own peculiar challenges, and of course, global agendas are always to be aligned with, but it doesn't allow us to the ability to just abdicate from the required and imperatives that the region has. The region is significantly concerned with its economic sustainability and its resilience, and the region has recognized that education is a key driver for economic development. But not only in terms of economic development, it's also a key driver for social sustainability and, importantly, social security. And we can take on the gamut of the social security issues and the gamut of social issues, which will include issues around building more inclusive societies, issues around promoting not just global citizenship, but regional citizenship and national citizenship imperatives. And these are all well aligned to that global agenda. But how we execute that global agenda is going to be conditioned and in many instances prefigured by the realities on the ground within a member state. And every member state is at a different point. Some of us are much more advanced in some realities, in some instances, and some of us are working towards getting to that point. What I can say is that there is equal commitment within the region in terms of political will to ensure that as it relates to SDG 4, the SDG agenda as a whole, but in particular with regards to the CARICOM Human Resource Development Strategy, there is a regional commitment made at the level of heads to advance the region's development using education as a driver. What we do at the level of the CARICOM Secretariat through our technical support is that we work with member states to identify gaps that are impacting, affecting, and in many cases preventing movement. And in working with the member states and identifying those gaps, we work with them to seek to close those gaps in a number of different ways, particularly with regards to the regional network of planning officers. Those capacity gaps that we have identified, we are seeking to address those by building strong peer mentoring professional relationships that is not just deepened within a member state, but deepened across member states, so that we can truly be each other's keeper, our brothers and our sisters' keeper, to ensure that as we move forward, we are moving forward equally together.
And leaving no one behind, which is very important.
Exactly.
Yes. Let us check in again with Nicole. Nicole, please.
Yes.
Yes, we can hear you now.
Yes, okay, great. Yes, from the Curacao perspective, we are also focusing on trying to administer the education to all children, because one of the things of the pandemic is that a lot of children were not able to follow their education due to lockdown, or currently we are again partitioning the classes, so that half of the schools the school are running on 50-50. And for this, it is important that the students that are children that are staying at home also have access to the material. And for this, we started a pilot program where we provided the schools with a small amount of MiFi devices in order to help for them, for schools to do also a pilot where they can see which children need the MiFi devices in order to make sure that they also have these devices at home. And also we as ministry, we facilitated the contacts with within the providers, between the providers and the school boards, in order to make this as a sustainable aspect for also for the future. Furthermore, we have close contacts with UNESCO, where we also are doing different trainings, and also talking with, as Farial explained, about the Microsoft collaboration, where we are trying to gather some external help in order to provide the teachers as well with the training needed in order to have this level of pedagogy that also comes with the home the distance education, which is actually different than the normal form of education. Next to that, the ministry is also trying and working very hard in providing clear protocols also to help the schools manage the situation, and also within our aspect with our new policies on distance learning and everything, in order to focus on the future. How are we going to work within this new normal, and how are we going to make sure that everyone has access to the education? These are some very small parts of which the ministry is working on. And in this moment, there are several other projects that probably I wasn't able to mention. But these are some things that we are working on currently in order to help and in order to make sure that we have access for everyone.
Okay, thank you, Nicole. Dr. Khan, I am asked to ask you to please log out and then log in again because of the technical audio problem. So if you could please do that. And then in the meanwhile, I will go back to one to two questions that we have received, and I think it is meant for Nicole. How are we going to implement or ensure inclusive and equitable quality education in Curacao starting now? Will this be bottom up? And then as a follow-up to that question, how can we enhance the level of the education here on Curacao? Nicole, if you could reply.
Yes, well, the idea is no, we're not going to do. It's not going to be top down for sure, and we are going. The focus now is to have a stakeholder engagement on all levels. So, as I explained, even the teachers, the parents, they are also going to be heard. That we also have, for example, we are used in Curacao to use these national dialogues as well, where we also have get input from everyone on different levels. So the focus here, seeing as we are focusing with the educational agenda that we are stronger together, then we really have to give the opportunity of everyone to also be able to have their input. Certainly, in the end, not all input can always be addressed and taken with us, but they are there to at the basic level. So we are here to be open and listen to everyone, and in order to have this discussion. For example, currently we have in the ministry we constantly have discussions with the how you call it, the unions, and especially from the teachers. So because it's very important to know, especially within the current situation with everything that we have that is going on, we have to listen also to the teachers as well, because they are on the field. So no, it's not going to be a top down. Yes, it's a combination of all the stakeholders, everyone that is needed.
Okay, thank you.
You had a second part of the question. I don't know if I answered that one as well.
Yes. You want me to repeat the second part? I think you answered it.
Okay, well then it's okay.
Yes. But in any case, let me just repeat it. How can we enhance? That's the moment. How can we enhance the level of the education here on Curacao?
Yes. Well, for starters, that one of the things that we are also, like I explained, we're working closely with UNESCO as well, is to also help the teacher training, because if the teacher as well, if the teachers are they have the tools in order to provide, for example, in this case, at this moment, also more digital virtual classes, then they are more secure of themselves, and they also be able to focus then their energy more on the subject instead of on the technical part, which also will provide the opportunity to go more in depth and provide a different type of curriculum, a different type of education program.
Okay. We will now go to Dr. Khan. If you could please answer that question. Then afterwards, I have a question directed to either Dr. Khan or Dr. Bristow, or both of you can answer it. But Dr. Khan, please.
Well, I hope you can hear me now,
Yes,
Secretary General.
Yes, we can.
Great. So I think to ensure that learning never stops and to keep the quality of education at the center, I think Curacao needs to take, in the midst of this whole pandemic crisis, Curacao Ministry of Education and the education partners can take 3 clear measures. The first, I would say, would be to assure the professional development of teachers. Teachers have been left unprepared, and they need guidance to transform digitally, to expand the classroom beyond the classroom, the walls of the classroom, into the digital space, and sometimes teachers had capacity, but they are teachers who need guidance and support to not just assure that the lesson takes place, but to assure learners' engagement, and to assure that to minimize at the center, so their learning strategies in a digital classroom need to be honed. So first of all, of course, is the support to the teachers' professional development to use online, but also low-tech approaches so that teachers are better prepared to enable continuity of learning. The second point I would like to say is we need to also strengthen the capacity of educational planners. With the economic crises that is foreseen because of COVID, we anticipate losses in employment opportunities. What are the skills that learners will need to continue to assure their employability and entrepreneurship opportunities? So education planners need to analyze the macroeconomic trends and look at what are the implications of these macroeconomic trends on educational policy, strategies, and practice. So this involves working with, let's say, ILO or ECLAC or the others who are working in economic analysis, but also working with WHO and the Ministry of Health for health and well-being of the learners. So planners need to really have that intersectoral approach that we were speaking about, working with health, economics, labor, and other ministries to really to come up with plans to build the resilience of the education system as we move forward. And to be prepared, not just for COVID-19, but hurricane and other crises, emergency crises that may occur. So natural disasters as well as health pandemic.
Okay. Thank
And
you.
thirdly, yes, yes, and this is basically by the thirdly, just last point, really enhancing partnerships. I think local and national and regional partnerships are going to be central for Curacao to align with national priorities, but also harmonize our efforts to put together our our knowledge and experience and resources to really respond to the crises. So these three measures is what I would recommend.
Thank you, Dr. Farial. Those are very, very interesting measures that you mentioned. So I'll now go over to the question. Either Dr. Bristol or Dr. Khan, or both of you can answer. What are the best practices for dealing with distant learning, especially during this pandemic where many children are not able to attend school? Who would like to answer? Dr. Bristol?
Hi. Um, that there you know, one of the things I always say to people when it comes to the educational problem, there is no simple answer. It, by nature of it being an educational problem, it means that there are quite complex responses, and quite often when you think you've solved the problem, you've actually treated a symptom and may have created another problem elsewhere. So I want us to kind of contextualize my response against that background, recognizing that within our member states that we are all in different positions. Some of us are more ready to engage in remote learning practices because we had invested significantly in learning management systems, and therefore it was quite easy a transition for some of our students and for our teachers. Even within systems like that, there were still great gaps of inequity that had to be addressed. But recognizing first where the gaps are. So we need first data. So before we can even think about how to respond in terms of designing the best practice, we first need data. And this is why in many instances, many of our member states were a little bit slow in taking off the track, because the first thing that they had to work out is what is the kind of data that we need to get the information that we need to design the interventions that are required. So we must know, for instance, how many of our teachers have access. We cannot assume that our teachers have access. And when we talk about teachers having access, we talk about teachers having access to hardware and teachers having access to Wi-Fi. But the access principle is also about efficacy and competencies around being able to deliver quality education in a remote learning environment. Recognizing, for instance, simple issues that we take for granted in the face-to-face environment, such as classroom management. How do you manage a class? How do you ensure engagement and maintain engagement in the online environment? And many of our teachers were not ready because many of our teachers had not received the required set of professional training needed for them to sustainably interact in that environment. When we determine who has access and what is the nature of the access that they have, it is then that we design the required interventions, and then we can start to become very creative in terms of notions around best practice. And I'm always very cautious around the notion of a best practice, because a best practice is only a best practice within the context that it is appropriate for and relevant to. In another reality, that best practice could be the cause of significant inequity and actually exclude a big population. So the response is tempered by what is the data that we need to understand who has access, and having that data and transforming that information, we can design what I would prefer to say as appropriate responses for the historical moment of the time that that particular environment is. So many of our member states actually, in fact, have used a blended approach, a combination approach, where they are combining remote learning for some schools that might be more ready, with a different, more low-tech, and I'm uncomfortable with saying low-tech, but we understand what we mean, more concrete face-to-face measures where packages are delivered either to children's home or packages are created in the school and parents come and collect those packages, take them away. Some of our member states have developed a kind of middle-range practice where they actually are uploading materials on flash drives, or they are designing content content to be delivered on radio or on TV. And they're combining those approaches with approaches that are more high tech in terms of very strong technology, ICT enabled environments, and they are being used in spaces, even within countries where they have more access. Because we do have private schools, we do have elite schools in all of our member states, and therefore the private and quote unquote elite schools where there's a higher socioeconomic bracket in terms of the parents and the capacity of the parents to support the school, they can make the transition faster. So even within member states, we see a range of different practices being experienced along the continuum. But I cannot emphasize enough that what is first needed is data collected. You must know your population, understand your population, transform that information about your population into information, and then including stakeholder conversation continuously. This reality has asked and is demanding that the way we communicate with each other has to change. The regularity that we communicate with our students, our stakeholders, has to increase. Yeah, and the kinds of questions that we typically would ask would change. For the classroom teacher, issues around classroom management off the top of my head. For the educational leader, how do I manage a remote school? A school that is primarily remote, even if it's a reality where my teachers are dropping off packages, how do I maintain connectivity amongst my teachers and support each other, mentor, and keep each other energized? So each stakeholder would have different sets of questions to ask, and those questions will be tempered by the data that you have so that you can design relevant and appropriate responses based upon the historical moment of the time, understanding that when more resources are invested, the questions will change and the responses will have to change as well.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Bristol. Would you like to add briefly to what Dr. Bristol mentioned, Dr. Khan?
Sure. I would just like to add that I fully concur on the contextualization of a best practice. And for example, if we take the specific issue of reopening schools, we see that, in Singapore or China or, Mexico in the Latin America region, Jamaica in the Caribbean region, they've been adopting various approaches that have worked in their specific context. In the case of Jamaica, they took the UNESCO, World Bank guidelines for reopening schools. They adapted them within their specific context and prepared a strategy. They were planning to open schools again revisit their plan and push back the opening. They're preparing. They're working closely with the Ministry of Education. They're working closely with health, with other partners in creating venues beyond the school and seeing what would be the hybrid modality, where some schools, some classes will go certain days of the week. They're developing awareness raising materials for learners. So there is a lot of there are good things going on. And I think the member states in the Caribbean are utilizing data and also learning from each other's experience to inform their practices. But to share that we can draw on those examples, but also be as Dr. Laurette raised a red flag. We also need to be assured that we contextualize it and are sensitive to the local situation. But I will conclude here, and maybe you have some other questions.
No, well, we are over time, and we will reply to the other questions separately, and maybe send them to you to get your reaction to it. And I would just like to thank you, Dr. Farial Khan, Dr. Laurette Bristol, Nicole Waver, for your time and your energy and your participation in our second edition of the Curacao 2030 SDG Action Week. I will not do a wrap-up, seeing that we are out of time, but I would like to ask our audience for them to remember that the SDG Action Week continues tomorrow with SDG number 3, which deals with health. So then, thank you once again, everyone, for your participation, to our panelists, and also to those who watch live via Facebook, and also via the link that was handed over to you. And let's just say, until another occasion, when we meet again. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Action Week. Good afternoon. Welcome to the second day of the SDG Action Week. This session is about SDG 3. I'm Ciaretta Profas. I will be moderating this session. This whole week we had a lot of events focusing on several SDGs. And we have SDG 1, SDG 3, 4, 7, 8, and 14. This specific session will be focusing on SDG 3, which is about ensuring good health and well-being. We have some participant instructions, which are very simple. There are, for instance, you are participating in a watch-only webinar. Also, on the bottom of the Zoom screen, you will see the Q&A section where you can post your questions, remarks, and also comments. If during the speaker presentation you have any question, like I mentioned already, you can fill also your question in the Q&A box. The moderator, so me, I will select any relevant questions as possible from the Q&A to pose to speakers during the panel session. And also you can ask additional questions during the panel by the Q&A. And if you have technical issues, you can go to the chat and message directly to the host. In short, we have also about 12 to 13 targets for the SDG 3. Currently, my colleague from the Ministry of Health, Environment and Nature, Beulah Scott, will be posting them in the chat box so you know more about the SDG 3. Also, you can look up more information on the SDGs at the sdg.org. And today, like I mentioned, we'll be focusing on SDG 3. We have two speakers. I mentioned also before, SDG 3 is about ensuring healthy lives and promoting well-being at all ages. Especially, it is especially essential for sustainable development. Like we all know, currently the world is facing a global health crisis, unlike any other, which is called COVID-19 pandemic. And also in Curacao, we are facing many unprecedented times and still dealing with the impact of COVID-19. Specifically to COVID-19 and SDG 3, we actually have a lot of questions concerning that. For instance, how do we track health developments and outcomes, design policies and programs, and also equip our health care systems to promote healthy lives and well-being? Of course, the task is much more larger than ever, while COVID-19 places a heavy burden on the public health locally, also on Curacao. To give more insight about SDG 3, we invited today two speakers to provide insights especially from the global perspective and also from the regional and local perspective. The session will start first with Mrs. Nicola Taylor, which is a program management specialist at the PAHO, WHO. PAHO is abbreviated for Pan American Health Organization. And also Mrs. Taylor will provide a global and regional overview of the status of some of the key targets before COVID-19 and the impact and implication of COVID-19 on health, and concluding with looking towards the future and also towards 2030. And also, the second presentation is more from a local perspective with the focus on health monitoring on Curacao. Concerning the health monitoring, Dr. Soraya Verstraeten from Public Health Research Institute on Curacao will present about population health monitoring in Curacao. Now let's start with the first presentation of Mrs. Nicola Taylor. Before that, I would like to provide some short background and bio about Mrs. Taylor. Well, Mrs. Taylor has about over 20 years of experience working regionally throughout the Caribbean, internationally in public administration and human nutrition and food. She holds also a bachelor in these areas, bachelor and master degree. The technical areas of focus include health policy analysis and development, program management, strategic planning, and advocacy. She currently works with the PAHO, like I already mentioned, based in Trinidad and Tobago. And also she holds the position of program management specialist for the Dutch Caribbean islands such as Curaçao, Aruba, St. Martin, Bonaire, Statia, and Saba. Mrs. Taylor is responsible for ensuring the PAHO WHO program of technical cooperation and provides adequate support to national development processes of these countries, while at the same time enabling them to contribute sub-regionally, regionally, and internationally to global health development. Okay, let me give a warm welcome to Mrs. Nicola of the PAHO WHO. I will introduce her next because she will provide us with more insights of the SDG 3 from the global perspective. Mrs. Nicola?
As you mentioned, my presentation will go over, provide an overview of the SDG and its targets for COVID-19 and the impact and implications of COVID-19 on health and into the future. We have to see how best we can move forward in the future. Next slide, please. As you all know, health is a key input to sustainable development, and it is fundamental to the spirit and the pursuit of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. Can you move to the next slide for me, please, or am I able to do it? Oh, great, thank you. All right, I'm doing it. So it also, the 2013 agenda also provides a powerful platform for us to be able to look at multi-sectoral efforts that address the persistent health gaps that we have, that also look at the social, economic, and environmental determinants of health. Can you move to the next slide, please? And then on to the next one. So as you can see, SDG 3 has 13 targets. I think we saw this before. And these targets touch on mortality, maternal mortality, child and infant mortality. We look at the reduction in communicable diseases. We also look at the reduction in NCDs and mental health disorders, along with tobacco control, substance use, and alcohol use. These are just some of the targets that we are looking at under SDG 3. If we move to the next slide, you will also see that SDG 3 and health in particular is also linked to some of the other SDGs that we have. And these are what we call health-related SDGs. So you will see health components in SDG 1, 6, 5, 16, 2, and even 10, 11, and 13. And this is because we're now seeing that health is cross-cutting. If we move on to the next slide, you will see a number of global and regional meetings and mandates. We can move forward. Yeah. If you can move forward to the next slide for me, please. These are just some of the global regional meetings and mandates that have shaped healthcare since 2015. I'll just touch on 3 or 4 of them. The first one being Sustainable Development Agenda for the Americas, which came out and was put together by the countries of this region of the Americas to track how they'll be able to achieve the targets set out in SDG 3. Then we also had a global conference on primary health care in 2018 as countries came together to reaffirm their commitment to the visionary declaration of the Alma of 1978. And this was very important as we look at pursuing health for all. In 2018, we also had a UN high-level meeting on the non-communicable diseases, where again, countries examined where they were and what needed to be done to move forward so that we could begin to see a dramatic decline in the number of people who have NCDs. In 2019, I'll just point out one more, which was also very instrumental in shaping healthcare. It's the other one looking at moving together to build a healthier world. At this UN meeting in 2019, many of the countries came back together to recommit to universal health care and to chart a way forward so that we could move together to build a healthier world. Next slide. Before COVID, at the end of December 2019, the region and the world had made major advances in health. We were beginning to see some improvements in health, but unfortunately, the rate of progress is not sufficient and was not sufficient to meet the targets of Goal 3 by 2030. We have to put in much more effort to be able to control the range of diseases that we are seeing and to be able to address some of the emerging problems that we continue to see. So in the next slide, I'm just going to give you an overview, a summary of some of the key advances in this particular region, the region of the Americas, because it would have been too much information if I had to put it globally. So I just reduced it to the region of the Americas, and I'll just highlight a few. In Latin America and the Caribbean, we have the lowest infant mortality rates of any developing region when it comes on to targets 3.1 and 3.2 that look at maternal mortality and child and neonatal mortality. When it comes on to 3.3, which looks at communicable diseases such as HIV, TB, malaria, we have made much progress in this region. Some countries have been able to eliminate malaria, and we have in Latin America and the Caribbean again the highest rates of antiretroviral treatment for people living with HIV across a developing region. Several of our countries have also been able to achieve the elimination of mother-to-child transmission of HIV and congenital syphilis. When it comes on to the NCDs, however, even though we have strengthened many systems and continue to improve the services, we've been able to look at legislation for sugar-sweetened beverages, fast food. We have even implemented a program called HEART to improve hypertension in hypertension control. However, this hasn't been enough and more work needs to be done with this, but I will come back to the NCDs a little later. Under universal health coverage, around 24 of our countries in the region have improved the capacity to provide access to healthcare, universal healthcare, and some have strengthened health systems. Next slide. With the universal access to affordable vaccines and medicines, through the PAHO Strategic Fund, we have been able to mobilize additional or procure additional medicines and diagnostic kits for a number of countries. And this has increased our ability or the percentage of countries who have access to these medicines. For health financing, yes, some countries have been able to increase the amount of money they spent on healthcare, but more needs to be done in this particular area. And we have seen a decrease in what we call out-of-pocket expenditure. But again, we have to do much, much more as in this particular region of the Americas. For 3D, improving early warning systems for global health risks, yes, we have been able to manage to improve our preparedness and response and the surveillance of outbreaks. And this is even now being challenged with COVID as we continue to move forward. And with what we call the international health regulations, we have been able to implement them across the region. However, next slide, we're still off track. And we're off track, even though we have made advances, we are still off track. And there are a number of challenge and ongoing negative trends that we're seeing. We see that we have very complex political systems in this particular region. We also have a low level of political commitment to some of the key priority areas that we need to look at. Disasters, diseases, and outbreaks continue, and we also have the impact of migration on health systems, which many of our countries are experiencing. We see the absence or insufficient intersectoral action, which is very much needed, and insufficient progress in addressing inequities in health. Many countries also suffer from the lack of capacity when it comes down to human and financial resources. So the trends we're beginning to see in this region is that we're beginning to see a slight decrease in healthy life expectancy, which is not good. And some of this is attributable to the mortality associated with NCDs and TB. We're also seeing a growing trend of homicides among the youth, especially in the ages of 15 to 24. And we're seeing various programs or approaches being used or trying to access care for those who are vulnerable and the marginalized populations. But if we look globally, that's next slide, some of the negative global trends still continue. And across the world, reproductive, maternal, newborn, and child health, we're still seeing that a number of children are dying before they reach the age of 5 years old. For infectious diseases, new HIV infection rates have remained the same between 2018 and 2015. And we have also seen large gaps in TB detection. Malaria still exists in quite a few countries across the world. When it comes down to the non-communicable diseases, mental risk, as I mentioned before, the probability of dying from an NCD, even though it has decreased, the rate of the decline is not enough. It is not enough to meet the SDG target. And based on 2016 data, and we're still trying to get 2017 data, we're seeing an increase in the number of suicides across the world, especially in low and middle income countries. When it comes down to health systems, yes, we have done well in certain areas, but we still have to do more. The vaccination coverage is up, but it's still, even with that, we can't prevent the outbreak of certain diseases like measles. Next slide. As we move forward and as we look at SDG 3, there's a particular concept that we always need to keep in mind, and that is universal health access and coverage. This is very integral in achieving SDG 3, and this is needed to end poverty and to reduce inequalities. Universal health access and coverage ensures all people everywhere can access quality essential health services with financial protection, and this is very important. However, we don't have one size, it's not a one approach. Each country has to figure out how to do it, but there are certain things they must keep in mind. One is their commitment to human rights, equity, and of course, leaving no one behind. And there are 4 strategic lines that they must look at: people-centered, community-centered health services, stewardship and governance, the improving of financing, and multi-sectoral coordination. So that's up to the end of December 2019. And then COVID came along, and many of you now are familiar or know that it started in China, in Wuhan, China. It affects the respiratory system, and it has spread very rapidly and continues to spread. Next slide. But for us, this is not. Other major challenges or events have occurred, and some of you may remember when we went through H1N1, when we went through chikungunya outbreak in 2014, when we even had to prepare for Ebola in 2014, 2015, and also Zika in 2015. And then in 2017, we had all of these very strong hurricanes. What makes this different, what makes COVID different, is that it actually looks at the vulnerabilities of people. Next slide. For us, it looks at the vulnerabilities of all countries, of many inequities that exist. These inequities relate not only to the health systems, but also to issues such as gender, ethnicity, geographical location, governance, food systems, and housing. And that is, it actually looks at the social, political, commercial, and other determinants of health. And this is what makes it so different from some of the other events we have seen. If we look in the region, for instance, the first case of COVID actually was identified in the US on the 20th of January, followed by Brazil on the 26th of February. And as of the 15th of July, the Americas became the epicenter for COVID, for the COVID pandemic. Out of the 10 leading countries in the world, the Americas has 6 of those countries: Argentina, Brazil, Colombia, Mexico, Peru, and the United States of America, with United States and Brazil being in the top 3. And as you have all seen and heard in our region now, we're beginning to see where many countries are experiencing community transmission. If we look at the next slide, you can see how the Americas fits with the rest of the world when it comes down to cases. And these figures were taken as of the 17th of December. But I'm sure, and we've already seen more additional increases in the figures. But as of the 17th of September, you can see that the region of the Americas, had 51% of the cases. They also had 55% of the deaths across the world. And this figure has certainly increased over the last week. I think the number of deaths is close to 1 million. So if we move on to prevention and control, many of you are familiar with some of the measures that have been instituted across the region. People have implemented intersectoral coordinating mechanisms, which you're familiar with. We have introduced PCR testing. We have tried to develop quarantine and isolation protocols. We have looked at the clinical management. We have also developed what we call risk communication material to help people identify some of the things they need to do. And we have had a very challenging area of trying to source equipment, PPEs, protective equipment, and laboratory supplies for all the countries in the region. But we must remember that we need to continue to protect the health workers because they are essential. They are essential and crucial for this pandemic. If we go on to look at impact and implications of COVID on SDG 3, this is where we see some change, some real interesting changes and what it has demonstrated. The negative social and economic impact of COVID-19 will have short, medium, and long-term implications for us. So what really began as a health crisis quickly has become a human and economic crisis, which will impact national development. And what it definitely demonstrates is the importance of all the SDGs to health and of health to all the SDGs. It has challenged our healthcare system. It has fractured what we call our social protection and also destabilized our economies, especially those countries in the Caribbean region where we depend quite a bit on tourism and we have not been able to earn any income because we're so tourist dependent with the closure of the borders. The impact, it has also impacted the poor, especially, and those also with underlying conditions and those who are unable to reach or access care. If we continue to the next slide, the disruptions in the essential health services, it's across the board. Chronic diseases, immunization, HIV, TB, and elective surgeries. But we must recognize that because of these disruptions, what we're beginning to see is that patients are dying from what are considered to be treatable conditions at higher rates than normal. And as for vaccinations, we're seeing this is an area that has been the hardest hit and is going to place us at risk. We also have to be careful of the outbreak of other diseases and continue to monitor, such as dengue and Zika. Many of you, therefore, are familiar with some of the mitigation measures. I know all of us have to wear our masks. You're familiar with the closing of schools. We have gone through curfews and lockdown and the number of people who can congregate. But what we're beginning to see also is that some of these restrictions have increased the prevalence of unhealthy habits. The use of alcohol and other substances has increased. We have seen aggravating mental health conditions and increases in domestic violence. And the level of success of some of these mitigation measures will vary from country to country. So just to highlight some key areas with COVID very quickly, COVID and NCDs, as I mentioned before, people living with NCDs have really suffered. They are, especially those who require regular or long-term care, because the COVID has disrupted their services. We have had cancellation of elective services. They have not been able to get transport sometimes to get to the services, maybe because of lockdown. Even when they get to the services, there may be insufficient staff. However, we need to find innovative approaches to reach this particular population. And some countries have started turning to what we call telemedicine, something as simple as using a phone to reach out to people. And of course, our countries have to commit. On the next slide, you will see COVID and mental health, which is also something that we need to look out for now because we're seeing more people being impacted by the COVID. And this is because of the stress and anxiety associated with it, the stress of losing a job, looking at the threat of sickness, the physical distancing, which can cause loneliness for some people, the overload of information, the amount of fake information out there. All of this has had a negative impact on people's mental health. So governments must and should invest in mental health. It's absolutely vital now that governments invest in mental health and include mental health services or upgrade the mental health services so that we can reach out to people. I just want to say a little bit on the next slide about the COVID vaccine and where we have reached with it. There have been a number of important developments over the last few months. There are nearly 200 vaccines now, of which 6 are in what we call phase 3 trials. Those are, you go from phase 1, phase 2 to phase 3. But at the moment, we're not sure yet which ones will be safe and effective. But nevertheless, our countries must prepare now. We can't wait for the vaccine to be ready. We have to start preparing. So we have to start looking at who should we give this vaccine to first and how we should give it to them. So recently we've been working with PAHO, WHO, and an international organization called Gavi to look at facility. And this is to ensure that countries will have the opportunity to get the COVID vaccine without compromising quality, cutting corners, and ensuring that the vaccine will reach everybody. Whether you are a high-income country or a low-income country, you have to make sure it gets out to everybody. And that's why it's important that countries really need to prepare from now. Some of the first people who may get it, who may have access to the vaccine, will be your frontline healthcare workers, those caring for the elderly, and of course those who have what we call pre-existing conditions. So let us then look forward, look to the future, and the future past 2020. In looking to the future, next slide, we have to remember that health is not a privilege. Health is a fundamental human right, and we have to make sure that all countries can provide health at the national, regional, and even at the global level to ensure sustainable development. So as we look forward, we also have to try to maintain the gains that we have achieved. We cannot allow those gains to slip, or we will slip back even further. We have to maintain those gains. So it's important that we continue certain essential functions. Immunization is important. We have to ensure we continue the immunization programs. We have to look at prevention and control of communicable diseases and non-communicable diseases. And we even have to continue looking at combating climate. Next slide. Just have past slides, but health can't do it alone. We have to work together. We have to also continue our health promotion approaches. We have to increase our investment, especially as we mentioned before, the investment in mental health, and we need to continue to promote and advance universal care as a core strategy. The use of digital information is also very vital, so that we're able to collect data and continue to collect data. But as we move forward, we need to be able, and also as we move out of COVID-19, we have to reactivate our national and local economies gradually, and it must be based on evidence and also the capacity of our system. So in concluding, in the last slide, move on to the next slide. As our director has said, PAHO remains unshakable in its commitment to the health of the peoples of the region of the Americas, leaving no one behind in the quest for universal health, reduction of inequities, and health for all. So that together in solidarity, we can learn from the past, build on our successes, and move forward united to improve the health and well-being of every child, woman, and man, not only in the Americas, but across the world. Thank you very much. I'll hand over to the moderator now.
Thank you very much, Nicola Taylor from Pan American Health Organizations. Nicola, stay with us because, of course, after the second presentation, we will have a Q&A. So remain also with your laptop open for us also. I think you provided a very evident message that before 2019, we had a different situation concerning our health system, especially SDG 3. And after COVID-19, it changed the whole scene concerning that also, especially putting more focus on the NCDs, the non-communicable diseases. And also, we are still on track, but still we have a lot to do with a lot of challenges in this area. Thank you very much. We are going for our next speaker, which is Mrs. Soraya Verstraeten from Public Health Research Institute. I can provide also a short bio on Soraya Verstraeten. She is a health scientist and researcher at the Institute of Public Health Curacao, which is called in Dutch Volksgezondheid Instituut Curaçao. It's abbreviated as VIC. She co-founded this institute in 2012. At the VIC, she coordinates data collection on health and healthcare in Curaçao through population-based surveys and data registration systems to support evidence-based policymaking. As the principal investigator, Soraya has led efforts on several large health studies, among which the National Health Survey in 2013 and 2017, and also the Global School-Based Student Health Survey in 2015. Soraya's academic research interests focus on the structural and social drivers of health in small island setting. Her endeavors culminated in her PhD dissertation titled Population Health in the Dutch Caribbean in April 2020. Soraya will will provide more insights from the local perspective concerning SDG 3. And the title of her presentation is Population Health Monitoring in Curacao. So let us give Soraya a warm welcome and start actually with her presentation. Thank you, Soraya, for being here at the second day of the SDG week.
Untitled. Greetings to all of you. Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. Bontai, and greetings to all of you in Curacao and those joining us from places. So it's a great pleasure to be here with you today on the second day of the SDG week. My name is Soraya Verstraeten, and I've been closely involved in monitoring the population health in Curacao during these past 8 years. And I can think of a topic that's more timely than the theme of this SDG, perhaps even of this entire year since March 2020. So we tend to see health through our COVID-colored glasses at the moment, since we're in the biggest pandemic that we and the world has seen over a century. But the COVID pandemic has also laid bare many factors that contribute to, as well as many that tear down, the health and well-being. But this may also be a positive development, as it makes us able to see what is going on and what is happening around us, to our island, to our communities, and to our family and friends. So it can work both ways, and I thought we could talk a little bit about how we monitor the targets set out in SDG 3, and what we are learning from how some Caribbean islands thrive or do not thrive in achieving better health outcomes for their populations. But to get there, I first would like to tell you about the Volksgezondheid Instituut. Slide, please. So what we do is we collect and analyze data on health and healthcare in Curaçao. to determine whether we are getting better or whether we are getting worse. And we do this for the benefit of evidence-based policy making in Curacao. And we base our research methods on international methods. So we can not only compare ourselves over time, but we can compare ourselves to, for example, other Caribbean island states. Collect our own research, such as National Health Service, or we ask our colleagues from within the health system, such as ADC, the Public Health Service, to provide us with data, or even within the government, such as Central Bureau of Statistics and Curac. So I find out when we talk about health in Curacao, we often think about the curative healthcare services given by nurses and physicians in hospitals and doctor offices. For many diseases, we know that this curative approach has its limits. There is only so much that medical treatments can do. It's like not turning off a tap of water, but just let the bucket fill up and manage the spillover with medical treatments. And as we have noticed, this is simply not financially sustainable, and it also causes a lot of suffering. So this is where prevention, the social determinants of health, and public health services come into play. Next slide, please. So specifically for the SDGs, we monitor a range of outcomes related to its targets. And depicted on the left-hand side here are the list of health policy areas that some of these targets adhere to. So we have general health and well-being, for which we use life expectancy as an indicator, or cancer screening, for which we can use mortality from breast, cervix, and colon cancer, or road safety, for which we can look at the number of people who die on our roads in a given year. So for each of these health policy areas, we collect data. We collect data from which we can make health indicators and compare ourselves to over time, and also with other countries, for example, in the Caribbean, but also in the Netherlands. So what I want to do today is I'm going to illustrate some of these measures we use to say whether our health is getting worse or getting better. So I'm just going to pick one of these. Next slide, please. Or two of these. I'm going to start general health and well-being. So I'm going to look at life expectancy and then continue with reproductive care. Next slide, please. So what you see in this graph here is life expectancy depicted vertically for men on the left-hand side and for on the right-hand side in the time period between 1980 and 2014. And the line gives the progress achieved in life expectancy. The black line is the Netherlands, and then we have the Netherlands, Antilles, Aruba, and Curaçao. So what you can see immediately is, if you look at the male life expectancy in the Netherlands, is that the Netherlands, in that short time period, has achieved a life expectancy increase of 7 years for men. And this spectacular improvement has not been reached overnight, but went very gradually. In fact, if we pull this graph completely to the left, and we end up 1850, so the period where in the Netherlands they started to collect this type of data, we can find that the life expectancy then was 35 years. So this increase was very gradual, which could teach us two things, I think. First of all, that we need to be in it for the long run, because it takes time to improve the health of our population. And two, we're not doing worse per se, we are just lagging behind increasingly. Because by now you must have plenty of time to see that our life expectancy development in Aruba and Curaçao has been quite erratic during this time period. And a frequently heard explanation for the differences is that Curaçao and Aruba have other influences compared to the Netherlands. For example, the characteristics of the people who live here. But also in the Caribbean, next slide please, But also in the Caribbean, public health in our islands is not doing that well. So based on life expectancy, again, we see that in the 1950s, we were still in the top 5 of 21 Caribbean states, but that position has now deteriorated. So in contrast, the current regional best performer, Martinique, has seen an enormous improvement in life expectancy during that time. So it's not it's a special event. So what are the causes of that? I was really curious about, and also what are the solutions? So next slide, please. In our studies, we found that an important reason that Curacao is lagging behind the life expectancy is that we still have relatively large number of our population being affected by disease and injury, represented by the policy areas related to the SDG targets. Next slide, please. So these policy areas are depicted on the left side. We have to think about HIV/AIDS, tobacco, obesity and diabetes, and hypertension. And especially if we look in the non-people affected, it's especially obesity and diabetes and hypertension that causes the largest disease load. And it's a shame, really, because we know from a medical point of view how to treat these diseases. And not only treat, but also to prevent these diseases. For example, HIV/AIDS, best practices there is that we can invest as a country in prevention efforts and also make sure that the treatment is accessible for everyone, as Nicola Taylor just mentioned. For example, traffic safety. We know that implementing traffic laws and enforcing them is effective in bringing that mortality down. So I was wondering how come that we are not doing so well, although we know best practices will work against that. What I did is data on all health policy areas for every current state that we could find data on. And we looked at health indicators for policy implementation, so that tells us something about how far along are they in implementing the practices. We looked at intermediate health outcomes, such as the prevalence or the incidence of diseases. We looked at the final health outcomes, which is often mortality. Next slide, please. So we were able to publish this study in the American Journal of Public Health. And the main conclusion of this paper is that the variation in health outcomes between Caribbean states reflect differences in the implementation of best practice health policies. In other words, next slide, please. Also, for example, if we look at infectious diseases, the best practice there is the implementation of the international health regulations. And the further along a country, so each dot represents a country in the Caribbean. The further along a country is in the implementation of the international health regulations, the lower the infectious disease mortality will be. Next slide, please. So in other words, it's not a coincidence Caribbean states such as Martinique, but also Cuba and Guadeloupe have relatively good population outcomes. They also have more extensively implemented best practices in public health. And if you're wondering, you see Martinique, Cuba, Guadeloupe in the top here, followed by the US Virgin Islands, Barbados, Puerto Rico, Aruba, and then Jamaica, Grenada, and other Caribbean states. And if you're wondering where Curacao is, please click twice. Yes, we couldn't take Curacao along even in this analysis because we're lagging far behind with the mortality statistics in Curacao. So, but based on the old data we have, last year that it was published was 2007. We see that the health policy performance score of Curacao is just underneath Aruba. And the reason for that is that we are not, in comparison to Aruba, we have a relatively high rate of homicide mortality and infant mortality, lack of perinatal mortality. Next slide. So that was general health and being. Now I want to show you a specific target underneath the SDGs, which is Sdg Type 3.7, and that's about reproductive care. And that target states that by 2030, we need to ensure, or we want to ensure, universal access to sexual and reproductive health care services, including for family planning, information and education, and the integration of reproductive health into national strategies and programs. So we're going to have a look at that. And the indicator we're using for that is teenage or adolescent fertility rate. Next slide, please. So slide, based on the data obtained from the Central Bureau of Statistics in Curacao, shows you the progress we made in the adolescent fertility rate between 1998 and 2017. You can see very slowly and a little bit erratic, it has come down since. And also, if we split up this line in different ages, when mother birthed her child, we also see that teenage mothers are getting older in general, which is a good development. So we can also approach it from an absolute perspective. If you look in 2010, 186 births were given by a teenage mom, and in 2017, those were 114 births. So, annually, still on average, 2 to 3% of all 15 to 19-year-olds girls in Curacao have had a child between 2010 and 2017. So what we see here is that we're progressing, but if we compare it to a regional perspective, next slide, please. We're just doing average, depending on, if you look at the fertility rates. It's average compared to the region and all 7 times higher than in the Netherlands. And I showed this picture a couple of weeks ago during a different presentation, and I was asked whether it's the Latin American cultural influences that have a negative effect on teenage pregnancy rate in Curacao. But if you look at the countries, other Caribbean countries depicted with even higher adolescent fertility rates in the Caribbean, you can also see English-speaking countries like Jamaica, or lying in a region such as St. Martin. So it's not a cultural thing. It's more, some countries have invested more in reproductive and sexual health care services than others. Next slide, please. So should we care about teenage mothers or the adolescent fertility rate? I hope you agree that we need to care about teenage mothers. But they are important for several ways. If you look at it from a social perspective, for example, these teenage mothers are often from poor families. And also we know that teenage mothers are not allowed to follow education in Curacao. So they are also more likely to drop out of school early, which decreases their economic prospects in the future. That is what Ellie Hellings and FIA and SIFMA looked at in 2010. So basically, adolescent fertility is a poverty trap. But also from a medical point of view, teenage pregnancies have a less favorable look. These girls have an increased risk of premature birth, perinatal deaths, and complications during pregnancy. And look at the mortality statistics in Curacao for the 2003-2007. There were 4 women registered who have died due to causes during pregnancy, so that's maternal mortality, and 2 of them were teenagers, unfortunately. Moreover, most of the teenage pregnancies in Curacao are unwanted. Based on the data collected by Adriana Boersma, a general practitioner in Curacao, we could calculate that 40 to 54% of all teenage pregnancies in Curacao end in abortion. And just as another indication that we are not reaching the ensure universal access to these services, is that in 2015, 5 were hospitalized after taking illegally obtained abortion pills. So we see teenage pregnancies have a lot of negative consequences. And you might ask yourself, why are these children choosing to become pregnant? Well, why not choosing, but why is that so? It's still relatively high. And, I hope you won't be too surprised by me telling you this, but next slide, please. The reason for it is that our teenagers are sexually active. So we did investigation. We did this student health survey in 2015, and we asked teenagers that were in the AGO's, the VSBO's, the HAVO VWO's, and the classes of the SBO's, several quite a long list with questions about their health. And one of the questions was whether they ever had sexual intercourse. And the mean of this group was approximately 15, 16 years, and 42% of the boys and 36% of the girls said they ever had sexual intercourse. So one of the repeat questions was that this group that is sexually active is what is the main prevention method they were using to prevent pregnancy. And 6% of them uses reliable birth control methods. We didn't ask that. They could select, they use condoms or hormonal contraceptives. We will pull them together into reliable birth control methods. So third below, you see that there are a few students that use less reliable birth control methods. So they reported using temperaturing or the withdrawal method. And to my surprise, some other method, between 10 and 20% of the students selected that. And we don't know what type of method they are using in that case, because it was an extra carry. But we did a focus group with 7 VSBO students, heard stories about that some of teenagers think that you can buy a bottle of beer with a logo depicted here with a pregnant woman and a red crudat drinking the beer. And the idea behind that is to put a coin in this beer and you drink it. And it is said that if a girl takes that after intercourse, that she cannot become pregnant. So if you were like me, I thought it was charmingly funny at first, until I realized that it's really something that these kids believe in. And it is fed by information and rumors. And it's really a big shame that one of the most expensive health systems in the region, the health community, we haven't been able to reach out to these kids to teach them better. So this was a pretty grim story so far, but thankfully we also have some success stories to share in Curacao. Next slide, please. Oh, sorry, I didn't want to withhold you this graph. So here you see the reasons the same students selected, not the same students, but the reason why for abstinence. So the reasons why students, high school students, didn't choose to participate in sexuality. And most of them selected because they want until they get older, which is something, which is a good thing because many of these students are 11 and 13 years old. But if you look underneath that, you see a distinction between male and female students. So female students, more often than male students, say that they haven't done it yet because they want to wait until they're married, or that they do not want to risk pregnancy, which is a good idea. For males, are more likely than females to have it. They didn't want to risk an STD, or they simply just not have the chance to do it yet, which might be relatable to us adults to spend under us as well. And look here, it says here, only a small percentage has chosen that it's their religious values. So this tells us that just speaking out of authority and telling them it's not a good idea to have sex will not be an effective method as well. Next slide, please. Okay. So what works? What really the best practices of preventing teenage pregnancies look? Well, first of all, youth development, give better future prospects. And this is where other SDGs, as Sdg 3 that we heard earlier about, come in as well. Education, after-school activities, and sports. If kids are busy, they make choices. Keep them busy with good activities, give them future prospects. So specifically for the public health area, we know that improving sexual and reproductive education information works. For example, via school programs, national campaigns, or outreach programs. We also improve, not only educate them, but also improve access to contraception, so they can also tools to make better choices, and also pregnancy termination. And we could do that via general practitioners or Familia, which is the NGO that works on family planning in Curacao. And in the case that a teenage mother becomes pregnant and she wants to keep the baby, we need to support so that she and her children will not end up in poverty, to break the poverty trap. And there are some NGOs working on that already, such as Fundación Guia y Forma. They run Kassenbroeder Pius, where these kids can stay with their children. There is a wet sociale vormingsplicht that includes childcare, so that the teenage moms can continue their studies. And we have some smaller NGOs like SEDA and Mamisada for daytime activities and courses. So all these, yeah. And if you're thinking now that these recommendations are not very new, that's correct, because we have seen quite a few reports in Curaçao already. For example, by research like Adriana Boersma and Ellie Hellings, but also from NGOs FIA, SIFMA, and Familia Plania, that have continually addressed this situation and have recommended these types of practices. Next slide, please. And here we are, the success stories. So, one of the success stories comes from the Public Health Service, formerly known as the GGD and now known as the GZ, which is a part of the Ministry of Health and Nature. And the Youth Health Department in this Public Health Service started a national campaign to increase the immunization coverage. And we can actually pick up that the immunization coverage among infants has increased then. So that's a great job. Another success story, the fact that this department was able to set up an elaborate network of COVID surveillance since the outbreak of the pandemic. And that's a good sign, because with the same method, it also help to combat other infectious diseases, such as HIV and AIDS. We have seen in the past 10 years that we have obtained services for population cancer screening from the Fundación Prevention. In 2010, they started with breast cancer. In 2016, they started cervix cancer. And this year, they initiated the colon cancer screening for the population. And also an example is Familia Plania. because during the COVID lockdown, they started a national campaign through social media, among other places, that promotes their services to anonymously test for STDs and for cheap outlets for contraception. Next slide, please. So all these services here to the policy areas, some policy areas of SDGs. So in the next slide, we see we have a lot of community involvement to reach these goals as well. For example, some community initiatives, for example, try to improve our food environments. Think the hoffies and the farmer markets and the community garden and the whole energy that these communities bring to our food environment. Some initiatives are trying to improve our living conditions, such as our cleanup, Curac, and also Curacao. Initiatives try to promote a healthy lifestyle. Think about the community regularity in communities in neighborhoods, for example. So all these activities positively support our general well-being and address some of these targets in policy areas of SDGs. Behind all these policy areas on the left-hand side are business interventions and also governmental departments and institutions, public health service, NGOs like Familia Plania, PSA for mental health care, FMA for addiction, that work to provide us with the services that positively affect our health. But also many of these services and many of these NGOs have seen repeated budget costs last year. So they need efforts in strengthening both in financial investments and in policy and innovation capacity. So we see expectancy has developed unfavorably compared to the Netherlands and the Caribbean states. And that was before the COVID pandemic started. So what about the COVID pandemic? Next, please. And actually, the data is not in on that yet. But I think that Curacao has done very well to the pandemic so far. There's only one person who died. Challenges we're up to are huge. We see that those governments that have further progressed in implementing best practices, such as the international health regulations or have strong mental health services, are better in protecting the health of their citizens and have also reaped the benefits of the medical progress in the last decades. So what has become clear is that we need investment in advance. Countries that did not do that have in fact reduced the ability of the citizens to cope without the measures that are necessary for a response. So after March 2020, we have seen our economic growth has seen huge increases in unemployment and food aid dependency. And this also shows us the downside of the gig economy. So in addition, the lockdown measures have had adverse effect on the social support that many people receive via neighborhood networks, schools, churches, and family annexes. We've seen civic unrest and here neighbor aid workers talking about increases in domestic violence and a deterioration of physical and mental health of some of the neighbors. We've seen it reported that some kids are not able to attend school classes through education, falling even further. And just as in other countries, people who are at a harder time than the rest of us are disproportionately affected. We also know that all of these factors independently pose additional stressors to our population, which we, if we're anything alike to other countries, will start picking health indicators as they become available as well. So one thing I see as a silver lining in this crisis brought to front the importance of public health. We see that those countries which have invested in the past on best practices in public health, on universal health coverage, good surveillance system, primary health care, or mental health, were able to do better. So first, the role of government is critical and has always been critical to how we as ordinary citizens respond to health challenges on crisis. So how can we take this negative experience and use it to bring people together and eventually actually make things in the long run? So whenever we should first realize that the causes of ill health are present on a large scale, so we also need to do them with large-scale measures. So if the causes of disease are present in the environment, such as poor access on information about reproductive health, as I showed you, or corona and other infectious diseases, also pollution of unhealthy food environments, we need to address this problem on a national scale. Often this requires measures that lie outside the field of healthcare and curative health, and that often require taking a political stance. Second, we need health leadership that is innovative, committed to improving population health outcomes in the long run, and that balances financial choices against the health interests of our population. And all of this will help to build the backbone of a stronger public health infrastructure, and will give us also the best shot to reach the best population health outcomes in the Caribbean again. And the SDGs, they provide a roadmap for us to achieve that goal. So just in case someone needs reminding, last slide, please. The fate of us all may depend on it. Thank you very much for listening, and I wish you a lovely day. Bye.
Straten from the Institute of Public Health, Curacao. You gave us more insight about the population health in actually the health monitoring in Curacao. We are going now to the Q&A section where some participants posted their comments and also questions. Specifically for Nicola, we have a question which is about, it says you mentioned an increase in domestic violence, alcohol abuse, and mental health issues due to the COVID-19 pandemic. And the question is, how can we ensure, taking into consideration the limited resources the islands have, that we support these people?
Okay, that is actually something we're working on now with many countries, because we have to ensure that the foundations or the NGO organizations who are providing services to people with mental health disorders are able to continue to provide the services. One of the key things is to find new ways of providing the service. So if people cannot come to you, then you have to find ways of going to them. What are some of the things we have heard from Aruba is that some of the foundations started reaching out to their patients and clients using their cell phones or even WhatsApp, or creating WhatsApp support groups for them. We also have to look at where people are living, or where they have access to where they're living, and be able to see what else we can do to help them, because they may not be able to physical distance the way other people are. So we have to be able to identify those who are very, very vulnerable. It is a very difficult challenge for all our countries, and each country is now trying to find a way to ensure that we can reach out to people. Because even if you did not have a problem before, we are seeing that some people are now turning to substance use, whether it's alcohol or smoking weed or marijuana or something, just to get through the stress. And that's why we need to work with countries. In fact, Mental Health Day is going to be October the 15th, I think, of October. And the key message for governments is that you must invest in mental health. The services, we must find a way to continue to provide those services so that we're able to reach out to people. In private sector organizations, they need to be able to monitor their staff, monitor how they're doing, how they're managing, and try to make accommodations for them so that they can both work if they have to work from home, even if they have children with them, to find ways of looking at how they provide their work, how they deliver work. We have to be flexible. We have to look for new innovative ways. And it's something that we are continuing to look at and work towards for this year and into next year. So we don't have the exact answer, but we just have to keep trying. We have to make sure that we keep trying and reaching out. Thank you.
Mrs. Taylor. I have a next question for Soraya. Mrs. Soraya Verstraeten, you mentioned in your presentation that Martinique and Cuba has adopted best practices that help them to become better. Can you mention some of these best practices that you mentioned?
Sure. So for each health policy area that we saw, there are several health best practices that we can collect data on. For example, infectious diseases, the example I showed is the implementation of the international health regulations. And the WHO can measure for each country specifically on which area of the international health regulations, how extensively they implemented the recommendations. So that is the example I showed you for infectious diseases, but it depends on the policy area. For each policy area, you have a different group of stakeholders, you have a different recommendations that we know are effective in improving population health.
Okay, thank you very much, Soraya Verstraeten. And Nicola, you wanted to add to?
Soraya is right. It calls for the investment in certain priority public health areas. So some countries like Martinique are investing in key priority areas like, as Soraya mentioned, infectious diseases, the NCD services, and looking at even, I think, I'm not sure, but they may look at mental health. So it really calls for the commitment of government to be able to invest, and it also looks at stewardship and leadership within government, that they're able to lead to actually work in those priority areas, develop the policies that Soraya mentioned, the key policies that will help the population. And you also look at prevention and curative, not just curative, you also have to look at the prevention efforts. Thanks.
That's clear. Thank you very much also, Mrs. Taylor. We have another question which is directed to both Mrs. Taylor and Mrs. Verstraeten. Curacao has a high rate of obesity and hypertension. Currently, a lot of work is being done in schools in general to advocate healthy eating. Do you have other tips that can be done to decrease that obesity and hypertension rate? It's directed for both Nicola and Soraya. Yes.
I can just mention some of the other interventions that some countries are looking at. For instance, some countries are looking to tax the sweet beverages, those some of those sodas, put a tax on sweetened beverages, and to be able to decrease or not to sell the sodas and all of those sweet things in schools, so that the children have and change the food menu, that they have access to healthy food, to fruits. We also have to look at movement, physical movement, looking at their physical, getting them out to play instead of just being on their videos or their computers. So we encourage movement and physical activities. So it's a number of different things. You can do those individually for the children, but you also have to get the government and the public health to do additional things, which, as I mentioned before, is the taxation on sweetened beverages, looking at salt intake and doing a survey on the salt intake, to be able to get the data, which is what Soraya mentioned, to get the data so that we can then form the policies.
Okay, thank you. Mrs. Taylor, Soraya, perhaps you have more to add to this specific question?
So I could add to that, but what Nicola just said about preventing obesity, hypertension, diabetes, is that I think it would be good if the approaches we use as a government would focus on the environment as well. because we have a quite unhealthy food environment in Curacao. We have a high density of fast food restaurants, for example. In the neighborhood shops, which we know a lot of people are dependent on to buy their main amounts of food. It's quite hard to find fresh produce. Perhaps they have some tomatoes or onions in the fridges, but it's quite hard to get some fresh produce. And if we look at movements, our road traffic situation is quite dangerous for cyclists or walkers. So I think it's good that we're starting with projects that aim to change the behavior of people, but I think it would also be more effective if, in addition to that, we would try to change the food environment so people can easier make healthier choices. And one of the examples that Nicola said, like a tax on soft drinks, we know that it's effective in bringing the number of soft drinks that people consume down. So also for that area, we have evidence-based policies that are actually able to, for people to make healthier choices.
Okay, thank you very much, Mrs. Verstraeten. We have one last question for Nicola. You mentioned that SDG 3 is very much interlinked to the other SDGs. Can you elaborate more on this?
Sure. So, for instance, SDG 3, if we look at, for instance, SDG 1, one of the targets is to look at the implement social protection systems. That has to work with health. Your social protection systems have to work with also health. If we look at SDG 2, Target 2.2 looks at malnutrition and the need to reduce malnutrition or the reduction of what we call child stunting or wasting. Again, that is also linked with health. So you have to look at both health and some other key areas to be able to end malnutrition. Another key area could be in Target 4, which has to do with education, to ensure access to early childhood development care and pre-primary education. So in some of the schools, you want to introduce some of those healthy lifestyle practices that Saraya mentioned. You want to get them thinking to move towards healthier behaviors at an earlier stage. And also one that is a very big area of concern is 5, which looks at violence against all women and girls. This is an area where we're trying to collect more data on across the region because we really need to look at the violence against women. Especially now during COVID times, we hear stories, but we're not sure. So we have to look at what's happening. But for sure, women and girls are at risk from violence. So those are just some of the areas. Also, climate change is also another one, and I noticed in Sarah's slide, she also looked at climate change. We have to continue looking at health and climate change. There is a connection between health and climate change that we need to always think about. It's not just, you can't look at them separately because one may affect the other. So for instance, we are seeing where we may be having the dengue, and you wouldn't believe that dengue and Zika is also connected to the climate change with the increase in rainfall that you have and people having these pots with water which can breed mosquitoes that then will affect your dengue rates. So there is a connection between climate change and also health. And that was just one example I gave. There are many other examples. So that is why we say health goes across the board, across all the SDGs. And even if we look at how we have had to respond to COVID-19, we've had to move outside of health. We've had to look at national security. We've had to work with the schools. We've had to work with our border closures. So all of these have to work together to ensure that we can promote the well-being, health and well-being for all.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Taylor. This is actually the end of our session today, but before we will end our session, I want to provide you both the chance to give some closing remarks about today's session.
Just to say in closing, thank you for inviting me. I was very happy to be part of this panel discussion with Soraya. It gives us an opportunity to express how important it is for us to address some of the inequities that we are seeing so that we can ensure that we have access to health for all, and that health is an investment that we have to look at because we don't want to leave anybody behind. So thanks again. I would say, I think is it still Bontari? I haven't been to Curacao in a little while because I haven't been able to travel to Curacao, but I do miss Curacao a bit. So again, thank you for allowing me to be on this panel. And thank you for me, Saraya, for being one of working with me and providing the local situation.
Thank you, Mrs. Taylor. Mrs. Verstraeten, some closing remarks?
Thank you. Well, it's been a pleasure to be on here. Thank you for the invitation. And I hope that we can, realize as a country where we're at the moment and can work together to see some improvements soon. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Yes.
In addition, perhaps, I have mentioned some examples in my slides from foundations, people that are working on certain SDG targets, and I would be quite curious to learn about other initiatives that are evolving in Curacao or I didn't know of. So if you have an initiative that adds to an SDG target, please go to our website, www.vic.cw, and send me a message to tell me who you are and what you are working on. I'm curious to hear from you.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Taylor and Mrs. Verstraeten, for your answers and also valuable presentations this afternoon. I want to thank also all the participants that tuned in and followed our session, and also to provide us with comments and also questions. I also want to ask all the participants to visit our Facebook page of the SDG Action Week. Like us, share. Also, you can provide more comments on that page. I would like to also finish to this session and also ask all of you to please stay tuned for the next sessions throughout this week. Tomorrow we have another session on no poverty. And thank you very much for tuning in and stay safe.